Well, folks, welcome to the heart chapter. As I mentioned before, this is cardiovascular system and it's broken into three chapters: blood, which we just covered, the heart, and then the blood vessels. So heart lecture is a little bit long. It generally takes me about, hour and a half to finish it. So I'm gonna try to split this into two lectures. So let's get into it. So what is the heart and why is it part of the cardiovascular system? So as we talked about before, the blood is something that gets moved around, and the heart is going to be the engine that's going to move the blood around. So in order to have the cardiovascular system, you need to have the engine, and that is the thing that pumps. You need to have the arteries, which will send the blood away from the heart, and then you have the veins, which will bring the blood back to the heart. And normally, deoxygenated blood is going to be designated to be blue, being blue in the pictures, and that's showing you that oxygenated and this is oxygenated and this is deoxygenated blood. That's going actually towards the heart. So it's going towards the heart for the most part, and the oxygenated blood, which has oxygen in it, is going to be red. And for the most part, those are going to go away from the heart, but that's not always the case. So I'll point out places in the cardiovascular system with the color scheme is going to be a little bit different, where the arteries are going to be blue and the veins are going to be red. So there are actually a few places that has that. So where is the heart located? So the heart is located in the thoracic cavity, in your chest. That's thoracic cavity. And basically that's where your ribs are, and the cavity is going to be going to be in the middle slightly, but not completely. So it's going to be pushed over a little bit to the side. The heart is going to be pushed a little bit to the left side here into the lungs. And you can see in this picture the colors. Major veins are showing blue and major arteries are showing red. And we will go through that when we get to the blood vessels chapter. So the heart is, like I said, is engine that drives the movement of the circulatory system, the blood, and it's going to move the blood, and everybody will eventually, you know, have a time when the heart stops working, and then you're not able to move around any blood or any oxygen in your body. Um, so you're not basically going to be alive anymore. But having a heart that doesn't beat, is not compatible with life. So the vessels basically are the tubes that are going to go away from the heart. Try to remember A for arteries and then A for away. So they're taking the blood away from the heart. And then the veins are going to be the ones that are going towards the heart. So arteries go away, and then the veins are going to go towards the heart. And then again, if the arteries are going to be blue or the arteries are going to be red, it doesn't matter as long as it's taking the blood away from the heart. So on the other hand, we have this other vessel that's called the vein. Veins go towards the heart. They're going to drain blood from your muscles, your organs, and take it towards the heart, where it's going to get sent over to the lungs for oxygenation. And the way you can remember this is V for veins, and maybe say V for visiting. So we have here V for veins and V for visiting. They're basically visiting the heart and to get some oxygen. So the blood goes to visit the heart, and then it uses veins to do that. In between these two, the arteries and the veins, you have capillaries. The blood is going to go away from the heart. They're going to go away via the arteries. The arteries will split into smaller vessels, so like here. And then they get to the microscopic size, and they're so small. Sometimes you have only one blood cell in the um, you know uh, at one blood cell at a time, and these are going to be capillaries. So the capillaries are going to be a place where your gas exchange is happening. Oxygen is released, CO2 is absorbed, on all that kind of stuff. That's going to happen in the capillaries. And capillaries, this is the arteries. They're splitting into smaller and smaller veins, creating this web kind of thing. And then you have the veins. They're getting into smaller and smaller sizes, and they kind of make this bed, capillary bed, where the exchange is happening. Okay. So heart is asymmetrical, as you can see. It's actually pushing into the lungs here, and it's causing the lungs, the left lung, to look a little bit different compared to the right lung. So what's happening over here is that right and left is according to the patient. So whoever you're examining, they're facing you. Therefore, your right side is going to be their left side, and your left side is going to be their right side. The part here, this part here is kind of pushing into the left side, which means the heart is asymmetrical. The left side of the heart is going to be a little bit larger compared to the right side, and that's going to cause the lungs to have different structures, and we call these lobes. You will notice the left lung has 2 lobes and the right lung has 3 lobes. So that's designated by these lines here, the lobes. So it's caused by the asymmetry of the heart, and below the heart, you have this piece of muscle that's called the diaphragm. That's going to pull on the lungs in order to bring air in. And then above the heart, you're going to have a gland here, right here. It's kind of hidden in here, and that's called the thymus gland. It's not shown here. Then behind it, you have your trachea, and the trachea has the thyroid gland. Then behind that, you're going to have the esophagus, which is going to connect your stomach, and that's where everything is located. So that's your trachea, and that's your thyroid gland, and thymus is right here. So what you're seeing over here is a little sac that surrounds the heart. The sac has a name. It's going to be called pericardium. So peri means around, cardium is referring to the heart. So that's called pericardium. You have 2 of them. You have parietal pericardium and you have visceral pericardium. They're both pericardiums. They're going around the heart. One is called parietal, the other one is called visceral. So, so how do we differentiate between these 2 pericardiums? So try to remember this. Parietal stands for a wall. So this one stands for a wall of a thoracic cavity. So if we go back on the last slide, that's your thoracic cavity, and this parietal pericardium is facing the cavity. So it's facing the wall. So that's going to be parietal pericardium because it's facing the side where you have to basically you have your lungs, you can say. So it's facing your chest wall, and then you have another membrane here that's called the visceral pericardium. This is the one that's on top of the organ. Visceral means the organ. So this one is called visceral pericardium. This is facing the organ, directly on top of the organ. So that's the difference. Thoracic cavity is, just think of it that as like the wall that's going to house the heart, and then the outer membrane would be called parietal pericardium, and then the inner membrane is visceral pericardium. Now, in between those 2 membranes, there is some space. So there is that space, and that's going to have some fluid. It's like, so here you have a balloon, you push into the balloon, you have 2 walls. Outer wall would be parietal pericardium, and then you have the fluid in between, and then you have the visceral pericardium, and this fist can represent the heart. So, you have 2 pericardial walls, and you're going to have fluid, and the whole point of the fluid is to reduce friction. And just remember, your heart is beating continuously, so if there was no fluid, there'd be a lot of friction. So this is what it looks like. You got your pericardium. That's your pericardium, parietal pericardium. However, it's very difficult to tell them apart like this. So anyways, you got your pericardium that's been cut right here, and this could be a human heart. Looks like you got a surgical gown over here. Um, so they're probably cutting into the heart. Um, so if you go to a butcher shop, well, well, so they might have like a cow's heart, and sometimes there's a left pericardium on there, and then the inside you have this fluid, which is pericardial sac, and that's basically going to contain the fluid and the heart. It beats for your entire lifetime. So the fluid really reduces the friction. So it doesn't rub against your lungs, it doesn't rub against your ribs, it reduces the damage. So one kind of injury or disease that can happen with this is if you get hit in the chest, is that it's called cardiac tamponade. So let me look it up for you. So if you get hit in the chest, or if you have some kind of iron imbalance, too much fluid can go into the pericardium, and that's what it's gonna happen. It's gonna look like water in there, and or basically it's gonna look like when you put water in a balloon and you're filling it up. Um, so, and then it's about to explode under high pressure, and that's what's happening over here. The fluid is filling in there and creating a high pressure. And the pressure is so great that it can actually create a heart attack. So the heart can't beat anymore due to the fact that this fluid is in there. So if this was to happen to anyone, they will have to get a heart surgery where they have to crack open the chest and drain the fluid and then put a tube in there to sew it up. And the tube drains the fluid and hopefully a person will survive. So that can happen, and it will be a very traumatic injury to the chest. And so maybe um, you know, that's called cardiac tamponade. And the reason I'm telling you this is because each of the organ systems, I'm going to give you either a disease or a kind of injury that's associated with it. And then I'll ask you about it on the lecture exam. So next thing we're going to do is cut into the heart. And as I mentioned before, many of the organ systems, when you cut into them, they have these three layers. And these are going to be the pericardium. So that's not the layer of the heart, but when you cut into it, um, so that's pericardium is a sac around the heart. But when you cut into it, you have three layers. And the outermost layer is called epi. And if you remember, epi means on top, cardia means heart. So epicardium refers to the layer that's on the top of the heart. So that's epicardium right here. So that's your pericardium, that's your epicardium, and that's the outermost layer. Then we have another layer that's going to be super thick. That's the muscle layer there, and that's called myocardium. If you remember the word myo stands for muscle. So it's a thick muscle layer of the heart, and basically your cardiac muscle. And in the lab, when you look at the cardiac muscle slide, it's going to be myocardium, and that's your cardiac muscle slide. The last one is going to be the one on the inside. It's very, very, very thin. That's the endocardium. Endo means inside. So that's endocardium, and that's going to be the innermost layer, and that's where you're going to have the chamber with the blood, and it's going to go and be over here. And when the muscle contracts, you have this layer on the inside, and it's probably, I'm guessing, it's made up of fibrous connective tissue. And you got your pericardial and visceral pericardium here on the outside, and that's basically what's surrounding the heart and what's inside the heart. This is a cartoon drawing of it, and inside the endocardium, you got this thick cardiac muscle layer. That's the um, that's the endocardium right here. That's showing the endocardium. This is the myocardium, and this is the epicardium that would be on the outside. So you got your two layers, pericardium, and then you also have your pericardial sac or cavity right here. So that's a cartoon drawing. You've seen this before, cardiac muscle or slide. You're required to identify this in the lab. you should be able to tell the difference between the cardiac muscle and skeletal muscle and smooth muscle. So just to remind you that these are short cells. It's going from one intercalated disc to the next. It's not as long as the skeletal muscle. And then you have these intercalated discs in between. And the nucleus is going to be big and fat. So you can see those as well. And then you have branching. So you have branching going on kind of right here. You can see it. So and then it's a little bit hard to see on this picture. Well, there are going to be these vertical lines that are there. That means this muscle still falls under the sliding filament theory. This is kind of going back to chapter 2. We said there are different ways the membranes of the cells stick together, and then you got these different types of junctions, tight junctions. Within those tight junctions, you have desmosomes, hemidesmosomes, and another type are called gap junctions. So gap junction here is going to be associated with the intercalated discs. So a gap junction is not the same thing as the intercalated disc. That's the gap junction. This is the intercalated disc. It's just going through the intercalated disc, but disconnecting one muscle cell to the next muscle cell. So it's between one cell and another cell, so the materials can make through the cells. So there's the nucleus you can see. And what's happening here is you got an electrical signal, and that's going to be telling one cell to contract, and then it goes to the gap junction and then tells the next cell to contract. And so this electrical signal will pass on from one cell to the other cell via the gap junctions, and that's how it spreads through the heart, and that's how the heart contracts. So these gap junctions are, this is one place where you won't find them in the heart. Now we talked about the layers of the heart, so let's go ahead and talk about the structures. So the right side is going to be opposite of you. So the right side over here, even if you're left-handed, then that's going to be, the right side of the heart. This is the right border. That's the left border. So this is basically taken out of the chest. Okay, so there's this pointy structure right here. This pointy structure. This is called the apex. Let me see if it's labeled. Actually, I'm just going to tell you that right here. This is called the apex of the heart. So if the patient is facing you, that's how you're going to describe it. So left side is going to be pushing into the lungs over here, left side of the heart. And it's a little bit bigger right here. And it's kind of pointy. So left side here is what's pointed. This pointy part is called apex, A-P-E-X. So people, if you remember geometry, you should remember that triangle, and the tip of the triangle is called apex. This is kind of a tip, so that's called why it's called apex. So apex of the heart, it is a landmark that should help you orient yourself to all other structures. So when you guys are doing sheep's heart or dissecting sheep's heart, you have the apex, and lots of images, they kind of, they point straight down, or they don't really orient the apex in the right direction. But what I want you to do is put it in a right orientation when you're trying to name the parts on the sheep's heart. So take it and turn it and make sure the apex is pointing to the left side. And then you can flip it, and then basically you take the apex and point it to the left side. So the sheep's heart or cow's heart, whatever we dissect, just try to put it in the right orientation first, and then try to identify all the parts. So that's something that's anatomically correct. The reason why sometimes you don't find hearts, you'll find some heart dissections online, and apex is facing, not the correct direction. That's because they're anonymous, and it's just random people taking pictures while dissecting, and they're not putting it symmetrically correct. So try to put the heart in the correct anatomical position, and then try to name all the parts. Now, if you cut into the heart, you'll notice there are 4 chambers. There are 4 spaces in there, and those chambers are called atria and the ventricles. So you have 2 atriums, 2 atria, singular is called atrium, and plural is atria, and then you have two ventricles. So let me see, I'm gonna try to draw it for you. So this is my version of the heart. So I tried to draw the heart. So you have two chambers on top. Those are called atria. And then you have two chambers on the bottom. Those are called the ventricles. And they're asymmetrical. So this one is a little bit bigger. Uh, that's going to be the left ventricle. And this is a little bit smaller compared to the left. That's the right ventricle. So let's go ahead and name these. So you have, this is your left atrium, and this is the left ventricle, and this is the right atrium, sorry, right ventricle, and then on top you have your right atrium. So those are the four chambers of the heart. So those are going to be called atria as plural and atrium as singular. So when you combine them together, they get plural, and then we call them atria. Okay, so the two chambers and the bottom chambers are larger than the top chambers. The ventricles are larger than the atria, and then the left ventricle is even bigger than the right ventricle. So ventricle refers, the word ventricle means chamber. So we have spaces in our brain. Those are also called ventricles. So the space or the chamber means ventricle. So the biggest one is going to be the left one here. So this is the biggest one here. And this is showing you the anterior view. So you're looking at anterior view here. But if you were to flip it over according to the position of your own heart, then these are going to be reversed. So if you look, if you flip it and look at the posterior side, then that's gonna have the larger ventricle on the opposite side. So when you're dissecting sheep's heart, you want to cut it open. So if you're not sure which one is right, which one is left, look at the ventricles, and the one that's the biggest space is going to be, or the one with the biggest space is going to be the left ventricle. So this can help you organize the heart or orient the heart, and then you can start naming these structures. If you look in the posterior view, you can kind of do this slowly. First thing I want to mention is the chambers. So then I'm gonna build on the other parts of the heart. Okay, so what's going to happen is the blood is going to go from the superior vena cava into the chamber, and then also from the inferior vena cava into the chamber that's called the right atrium. And then the chamber has myocardium in it, and it's going to squeeze the blood, and it's going to go through this wall right here, and it's going to go into, let me change the color. It's going to go into this ventricle, the right ventricle. This has real thick layer of myocardium, and that's going to squeeze it, and it's going to squeeze it, and it's going to send the blood into the pulmonary trunk. This is the pulmonary trunk here, and that pulmonary trunk pulmonary stands for lungs, and this will go into the right lung and the left lung, and then it's going to go into the lungs, get oxygen and oxygenated blood, and that's not blue anymore. It's going to come back here through these pulmonary veins, and that's going to be red, even though they are veins, and that's going to head into the first chamber here. So one comes from here, the other comes from the other side, and it enters this chamber here. And then it's going to have this really big artery called aorta, and the aorta will send blood everywhere else. So the reason why left ventricle is the largest is because it sends blood everywhere else. So blood goes through another valve into the left ventricle, and that's going to pump it out through the aorta, and then it's going to take the blood to the different parts of the body, oxygenated blood. So it goes to your, fingertips, your brain, and things like that. So it needs to be much bigger. The left ventricle is bigger, and the reason is because when it squeezes the blood, it goes into this really big artery called aorta. The aorta will send blood everywhere else in your body, and that's the reason why left ventricle is the largest, because it has to send blood everywhere in the body. So in order to accomplish the task, it needs to be bigger. The muscle needs to be thicker, because the right ventricle only needs to send the blood to the lungs. So that's the reason it's not as thick as the left ventricle, whereas the left ventricle needs to send it everywhere else in the body. So the right ventricle doesn't need to be very large in order to pump blood to the lungs, but the left ventricle needs to be large and bigger due to the fact that it has to send the blood to the systemic circuit. And the systemic circuit refers to the entire body versus the right ventricle when it needs to send the blood to the pulmonary circuit, which is to the lungs. Okay. The right atrium to right ventricle, and then left atrium to the left ventricle. So what do we call the stuff between the chambers? We said the parietal refers to the wall that's going to contain. Well, the term that the wall that separates, the term for that is septum. So this septum is dividing, and you have yourself two atria, and right atrium and left atrium. This wall is going to be called interatrial, between the atria, and it's dividing the atria is called interatrial septums, tissue between the two atriums. And then we have much thicker wall here between the ventricles. This is called the ventricular septum. It's separating the two ventricles. And there's the tissue between the two ventricles. So septa makes it much more efficient to send blood from the lungs to the body and so forth. So just to give you an idea, the circulatory system can be different for humans versus other animals. So let me, I think I have a slide, yeah. So this is the heart for circulatory system for different vertebrae. So this is the fish here, and it has only two chambers, and the blood goes into the right, goes into the heart, and the heart goes into the gills. And then from there, it goes to the rest of the body. So that's not very efficient because you don't have much pressure going on here into the gills. After the gills, you don't have much pressure going on for the rest of the body either. So in order to make this work, you have to be cold-blooded. So same thing here. So if you are very active, you're more active, then you need to generate more pressure. So we got amphibians and some kind of reptiles. They've got three chambers. The ventricle is just one chamber. And that's where the mixing of the blood happening. They mix and then they go back to the lungs and then gills. So at least part of it does. So this is not very efficient. Again, this only works if you're cold-blooded, but if you're not, and you're not active, but if you're active, you're warm-blooded, then you fly, and then you need to have four chambers instead, and instead of three, and then you do the circulatory system. That'd be super. You have the circulatory system that's very efficient. You can generate lots of power, send blood over to the lungs, and lots of power to send blood back to the body. So that's basically we learned by looking at the other invertebrates. All right, so when you were a baby, okay, so think about this when you were in your mother's womb. So what was in your lungs then? Was it air? So no, there was no air there. There was fluid. So you had fluid in your lungs. So if you have fluid in your lungs, then when you're a fetus, what's the point of sending the blood to your lungs? There's no point. So you're going to get your oxygen from your mom. The umbilical cord is sending you the oxygen. And mom's placenta, and then the baby's umbilical cord is where, you know, your sugar is coming from. That's where your oxygen is coming from. It's not coming from your lungs. And because of that, nature has bypassed the lungs. So what you have over here is that's going into the right ventricle, and then from there it's going to the going from the right atrium to the left atrium. is this opening, and it's bypassing the lungs basically. So what the nature did, they put a hole in here. It's an interatrial septum. So the hole is an interatrial septum. The blood skips the right ventricle, and it goes straight over here to the left atrium. You don't have to go through the lungs at all. And then from the left atrium, it's going to pump it down into the left ventricle, and then it goes to the body basically. So it just skips the lungs altogether. That's because your lungs don't have any oxygen. There's no point sending it over. So when this is open here, it's going to be called foramen ovale. Foramen means hole. We'll learn that in the lab. So foramen means hole, and this is called foramen ovale, and it's a hole. And then we use that term foramen for bones a lot. You have in your bones, you have lots of little holes, and foramen is singular, foramina is plural. So we'll talk about that in the lab when we talk about the bony markings. So once you're born, you don't need this anymore. So the second that you take your first breath, this is going to close. This is like a little flap that comes down and closes. When it closes, we don't call it foramen anymore. We call it something else. We call it fossa. Fossa is like a depression, and it's something like a little scoop, and that's in there. So we call it fossa ovalis. It's a little so if you look at maybe animal that's just been a heart of an animal that's just been born, um, then you'll be able to see that a fossa ovalis is going to be the remnant of the hole that used to be there. So let me see if I can find your picture. I couldn't find a heart that was dissected. So anyways, if you look at the heart of the animal that's been born, and you'll see this fossa ovalis is going to be the remnant of the foramen ovale. That's the hole that used to be there, and that turns into fossa ovalis, so just a depression instead of a hole. And that hole helps the fetal heart to bypass the lungs. But once you're born, you can use your lungs, and the hole closes. Oh, here's a picture actually. So this one is showing you the fossa ovalis here. Helps you bypass the lungs as a whole, but then after that it closes. So some people, and sometimes some students, they might have heart murmurs. So what a heart murmur is, that it's where you have blood going into places where it's not supposed to be. So what happens is, when the blood goes where it's not supposed to be, it makes a weird swishing sound that's called a murmur. Some people are born, and then the flap that's between the right and the left atrium, it doesn't close all the way, or it's partially open. It remains open or partially open. So what happens is blood is going to switch back and forth between these two atriums, and that's going to create a sound. That sound is called a heart murmur, and you can see it in the ultrasound. You can't see it here, but in a real ultrasound, you can see color of the blood. It's color coded. So you can see that a red and blue and then purple would be mixing up of the red and blue in the fetal heart. It's normal to see that purple, but once you're born, it's not normal. So if you got purple blood mixing, the blood that's being shown on the ultrasound is purple. That means there's a defect. And the name of the defect is called atrial septal defect. So that's basically the foramen ovale didn't close with the flap, either partially or completely. So you got inefficient mixing of the blood that causes that murmur. So most of the time it's very minor. You can go get it checked out either by your primary care physician or your cardiologist. Um, and for the most part, they'll just say, you can still do your PE, do your athletics. And but if it's a really big hole, then you have to, that can be causing an inefficient gas exchange. Then you could be out of breath, and you could have difficult time breathing, getting your oxygen to your muscles. Then they might want you to go into a heart surgery. They'll do an open heart surgery, put a little device there to close this up, and then repair it, and then you will be good to go. So heart murmur is caused by atrial septic defect. So the next thing I want to talk about is going to be the valves. So we have the valves that are going to be a structure that's going to control the movement of the fluid through the heart. So in this case, it's going to be between the two chambers. You have a couple of them. So these valves are going to also prevent the backflow. You don't want to have the blood go backwards. Otherwise, you're going to be wasting energy and wasting time. So what I'm talking about is blood is going to go from your superior vena cava. That's your it's gonna go from your superior vena cava into your atria, right atrium, and same from here coming up here, and then it's going to go past this valve here. There's this valve here, and it's going to go into the right ventricle, and this valve is going to prevent the backflow, and this right ventricle is going to contract, squeeze the blood, and then the blood wants to go in every direction, but you want to make sure that it will only goes in the right direction towards the lungs. So here you don't want to go backwards. So we have four valves. That's what are preventing the blood from going backwards. So we have tricuspid, pulmonary, bicuspid valve, and aortic valve. So if you go ahead and take this heart and you cut this heart like this in this direction, kind of around this area in a transverse, make a transverse cut, and then you look at it from the top, this is what you're gonna see. You can see all four of the valves from top at the same time. You could try it. So you have your tricuspid mitral valve. You'll notice that there's another name for the bicuspid valve. It's also called mitral valve. You have your aortic valve and you have your pulmonary valve. So let's go over these. First one we have is the tricuspid valve, and tricuspid is also known as, so aka also known as the atrioventricular valve. So basically that's the valve between the atrium and the ventricle. The atrioventricular valve is the valve between the atrium and ventricle, and it's probably easy to remember that. And the tricuspid is just it's called tricuspid because it has three cusps. So it has three cusps, three leaflets, and those three leaflets are called cusps, and it's called tricuspid because of that. That's going to go ahead and send blood from your right atrium, into your right ventricle. So that's connecting the right atrium to the right ventricle, and that's your tricuspid valve right there. And it's preventing the blood from going backwards. Again, you don't want the blood going backwards into the right atrium, so it's gonna shut like this. So it's opening in this direction, and then it's gonna shut in the other direction. So that keeps the blood from going backwards. So when it's shutting, that's the sound that you hear when you put your ear against somebody's chest. When you have stethoscope, you're going to have these valves shutting that create this sound, and you could remember it as being the tricuspid valve, and the other name for it is the right AV valve. AV stands for atrioventricular. So you could call this right AV valve. That's the other name for it. So this is the right AV valve. That's because this is on the right side. It's between the atrium, and that's the A stand. That's what A stands for, and the ventricle. That's what the V stands for. So the right AV valve is on this side, and you can kind of see where I'm going with this because on the other side you have left AV valve. So that just makes your life easier. You can remember it as the atrioventricular right AV valve. If you don't want to remember the tricuspid name. Okay. Next one we have is pulmonary valve. Pulmonary is the word for the lungs. That's the term associated with the pulmonary. If you are dealing with something that's pulmonary, you're going to, you have lung problems, and maybe you're a smoker, maybe you have emphysema, anything that has to do with the lungs, and you go see a lung specialist, they're going to be called pulmonologist. Pulmonologist is a person that studied the lungs, they're expert on the lungs. Okay, so pulmonary valve is also called AKA pulmonary semilunar valve. So that's the pulmonary valve there. So this is going to the pulmonary trunk. This is being called pulmonary artery here. I'm gonna erase this. This is not pulmonary artery. It's pulmonary trunk. So when you have a tree, you have basically the trunk of the tree, and then you can have branches, of the tree, and that's going to be the arteries and the veins, but this part is going to be called the trunk. So we're looking at this big part right here, that's called the trunk, and then you can see it's branching out. So this is not the artery, this is the trunk. So it's just like a tree. The tree will branch. So over here you have the big thick vessel, that's going to be the trunk, and then you see the branches that are going to be the pulmonary arteries. So when it branches, the pulmonary arteries are going to be go to the lungs. So you have to be very precise. So the pulmonary valve is going to the is found here, which is going to the pulmonary trunk. These are also called semilunar valves. The reason they're called these because when you look at it straight on, it almost looks like a crescent moon. But you don't have to worry about that. Just call it pulmonary valve, and then you'll be good. So I said it's it's found between the right ventricle and pulmonary trunk, not the artery, the pulmonary trunk. So between the right ventricle and the trunk, there's the valve. It prevents the blood returning to the right ventricle. All the valves, they prevent the backflow. Next one we have is called the bicuspid valve. So, the last one was tricuspid. This is bicuspid. Bi means two. Tricuspid had 3 leaflets. This one has 2 leaflets. Another name for it is the left AV valve, atrioventricular valve, or the mitral valve. So those are a couple names. So the third name is the mitral valve, and you might be wondering, where that's coming from. That one stands for Pope's hat. So Pope's hat, if you look at, I think I pulled it up. If you look at Pope's hat, that's what it looks like. And mitral valve is kind of shaped like Pope's hat. So that's where the name is coming from. That's what it's named after. So it has 3 names: bicuspid, AV, left AV valve, and mitral valve. So I think the easiest one to remember is the left AV valve. The other one is right AV valve. So this, again, its job is to prevent backflow from the atrium into the atrium from the ventricle. Very last one here we have is the aortic valve. The reason why it's called aortic because this is the one that's controlling the blood going into the aorta. That's the aorta, and that's the aortic valve there. This is the largest artery in our body. It's the largest one. It's coming straight off the heart. And the semilunar valve is not very useful. So just call it aortic valve. And this one is usually hidden. So the pulmonary trunk is usually in front. So it's anterior. So it's kind of hiding. And when you look at the charts or the models, aortic valve is usually very hidden. You have to really kind of look for it in order to find it. But if you follow, the order of the heart, then it'll be connected to the aorta. So from there, you can find it. So that's also going to prevent the backflow of the blood to the left ventricle from the aorta. This is where it's going. This is what a nice heart looks like. When you go ahead and get a heart that has all the tubes and still connected, this is where you can see all the structures. So it's a little bit more complex than, than we just talked about. So let's look at this one here. So you got um, your tricuspid valve here. That's your tricuspid valve. And then you're going to notice this tricuspid valve is connected through these cords. These cords. And these cords are called chordae tendineae. So chordae tendineae. And these cords, you'll see these cords are going to be connected to this muscle here. And this muscle is called papillary muscles. So these, what's happening here is that these papillary muscles will pull on the cord to give the valve more tension depending on how fast the heart is beating. Sometimes your heart is beating so fast that you kind of need to pull the valve a little bit, and that's what these structures are. So it's not enough just to say, that it's going to be the tricuspid valve, but you also need to be able to tell the difference between the chordae tendineae and tricuspid valve and the papillary muscle and so forth. So you got yourself interventricular septum that's going to separate the right side from the left side in the ventricles. That's your interventricular septum here. Interatrial septum would be up here. So, and then you have your pulmonary trunk here. This is pulmonary trunk, and that's gonna kind of branch out later on into pulmonary arteries. And then, like I said before, it's called trunk because it's branching out later. And then you have your aortic valve here. So you have your bicuspid valve right here, and then your aortic valve will be kind of down here. It's hidden. It's going to the aorta. This is called the right atrium. This is not correct. It's not right atrium. This is right auricle. Atrium is the chamber that's underneath. So this is auricle of the left heart, left atrium, sorry. And this is the auricle, right auricle. That's this flap right here. But the right atrium is the chamber there. So that's also kind of incorrect. So like I said, we have to be precise. So you have your left AV valve here, and then also known as bicuspid valve, mitral valve, and we don't see the aorta, aortic chamber, or sorry, not the aortic, the atriums here, the atria, because it hasn't been cut into the atrias and they're still intact. This term auricle means ear flap. So this is auricle on top of the left atrium. This is the auricle on the right atrium. So those are some extra things you have to know for the heart. And when your atria needs a little bit more space, it kind of expands into the auricle, and when they're contracted, it's not really being used. But when it's being used to the full capacity, sometimes it kind of expands a little bit. So you're going to be responsible for knowing all these different terms. And then when we do the blood vessels, we'll name all the blood vessels as well. So I'll be making another video for the heart lecture. So I'm gonna stop this one here.